What's your got fired but was totally worth it story? Worked at a big supermarket chain. Did cashier job, placed out products, and some behind-the-scenes management. One day I get called to the back. It was the regional manager, said my deficit after my shifts as cashier is getting out of control. About 10 to 50 bucks every shift. Threatened me with cops saying that they surveillance videos showing me stealing the money. I said, sure, get the cops here, I'll just wait. After 30 minutes, cops arrived. When we started watching the footage, there was nothing showing that I stole the money. Cops said there is no evidence against me and took off. I still got fired on the spot, and they even banned me from entering their stores all over the country. A few weeks later, I get a call from the girl that was working there with me, covering me for smoke breaks when I was cashier, teared up, choking from crying. It was her stealing the money all the time while I used my breaks. Got charges pressed against her, did 120 hours community service, and paid a huge fine. A few days after that, I get a call from regional manager apologizing for the inconvenience and asking me if I want to return. Told him to duck off and hung up. Story 2. Reported coworker for harassing. Manager fired me for making the accusation against her friend. She got fired. The district manager got fired. He got fired after he was caught in a bathroom with a woman. Story 3. I was working in a small accounting firm making less than minimum wage $30,000. Minimum wage in Australia is $38,000. The boss was exploiting the fact that people like me were desperate to get their foot into the door of accounting, as it is very competitive in Australia. One day I was stupidly posting on a forum about my situation and looking for advice. The boss found out and fired me on the spot. Feeling pretty spiteful about the whole thing, I reported my situation to Fair Work Ombudsman Australia. A month later, I got payment for the amount I should have been making at minimum wage for the 6 months I was there. About a month after that, I landed a much better role at large company, making almost double what I was making previously. The icing on the cake is the firm ended up getting investigated by Fair Work, and I can only assume they received a hefty fine because they are no longer in business. Story 4. I worked in a bar with an awful boss. He would always flirt with the female bar staff, making us all uncomfortable. We all knew his wife and 2 children, but about 6 months into me working there, he began to date with customer. By date, I mean he used to go downstairs to his office and sleep with her while he was on shift. No one was allowed to talk about it, but we all knew. Quite quickly, he knocked her up and ended up breaking up with his wife, but he still flirted with his staff relentlessly even when his new baby was born. He once told a male employee that he liked asking female bar staff to pick up things from low shelves so we would bend over and he could check out us. Ew. So anyway, he always used to break health and safety rules if he could get out of doing a task he didn't want to. He was prolific for asking bar staff to clean human waste, vomit/poop customers had done on the floor. Even though legally, anyone cleaning that stuff needed to have passed a certain health and safety qualification. I spoke to my assistant manager about this, and she confirmed that only management can do it, and I should refuse next time. One day, he demanded I cleaned up vomit in the male toilets, and I refused, repeating what the assistant manager told me. My boss went absolutely mad. He wasn't used to people standing up to him. He told me to come downstairs to his office to speak about it. At that moment, I knew I wanted to quit, so I told him I won't be going downstairs with him. He asked me why, and I replied, the last girl who went down there with you ended up getting pregnant, so that's going to be a nope from me. Lost my job, but worth it. Story 5. Was working at Little Caesars at the time, was probably my second month or so. About an hour before my shift starts, my mom calls and says my grandma fell down the stairs and is at the hospital, and I need to go right away since she works farther away and I can get to her first. I call LC to tell them I can't come in, and my boss said if I don't come in, I'll be fired. I say okay and hang up. A few hours later, I get a voicemail saying I've been let go from LC. Totally worth it to make it to my grandma to check on her. Story 6. I worked at a place in Grand Bend, Ontario. I was the chef. The year before I was hired, they'd left the place a mess and violated health code to the point where they had been cited. I was working uphill against that and a crazy owner who would rather act like she was 21 than run her ducking business. On a July evening, someone stuck a hot, dirty sauté pan into my stack of cool, clean pans. I wrapped my hand around it and, man, that was an intense level of pain. Literally had to peel the pan from my hand. Crazy owner wouldn't let me call an ambulance because it would be bad for business. Insisted I run service from the other side of the line. I took a few days medical leave after that, and all the while fielding harassing phone calls saying how I was letting them down. This place was awful, and I'd had no staff for weeks because, again, ownership ran them off. I handed in my notice and was promptly escorted off the property. It was gratifying to watch their reviews sink after that. Food going out cold, moldy mushroom burgers, etc. Story 7. I was hired as a consultant in a kitchen along with another person. She was more qualified than I was. In the science of cooking, no doubt about that. She couldn't stand me and questioned my ability. A craft I have been in for 10 plus years. She got the lead position with me under her and a young kid who was days from being fired. I took the young guy and turned him into a real cook, who is now a chef back in his home state. I was told by GM how I was a godsend for them and how I was such a role model for the young guy. The woman who was now chef would sit in the kitchen and work on dishes for 4+ hours without making any decisions, and had the two of us doing everything and never checking in on it. Most of the time when we would be back up in the kitchen, she would be just sitting there. She was collecting money and putting no real work in. She never added any dishes to the menu other than a few specials that weren't anything to write home about. I called her out on it and she kept telling me my work wasn't up to snuff for the restaurant. I'd come in the next day and nail it. Then it was something else. I'd change what I was doing and correct the issues she had, and then something new would be wrong. Finally, one day I was alone in the kitchen. Because the young guy was on vacation, she was at a funeral and I was sick as a dog. I shouldn't have been in the kitchen, but I was and had a fever and all. The next day she told me she was grateful for me doing what I did, but I could have done a better job. I told her that if she didn't like the job I did to either shut it or fire me. The next day I obviously knew I would be fired. You can't talk to a chef like that, and I understand that. So at the end of the shift, the GM and the chef sat me down and asked me if I knew why we were talking, and I turned to the GM and went off on how I shouldn't have been in the kitchen at all the day before, how all these random issues with my performance would come up and be correctly instantly. And the next day there was something new, and I looked at the chef and said, "She's full of crap and she just didn't like me and targeted me because of it." The GM of the restaurant then explains how, yes, they were letting me go, but they wanted to give me a severance for me leaving my last job to come to them as a consultant. I was actually surprised. That's not a common thing in the kitchen at all, and was a bit embarrassed because of it, and said so, but that it didn't change anything I meant or said. The GM caught me on the way out and said how he agreed with me, but he was required to listen to the chef as well. Less than 2 months later, she turned her anger on the kid and fired him, and 6 months later, she was let go herself. I hired the kid at my current job before he moved back home. I have been at my current kitchen for 3 years, and I manage a mobile kitchen that has 2 permanent spaces and work pop-ups and concerts and such. I still hate her with all my heart. Laziness has no place in a kitchen. The only great thing I can say about all the work I had to do there was I was jacked from literally lifting things by myself up and down stairs from prep to kitchen. My arms and core never looked better. Story 8. Unreasonable sales targets, and in the middle of a one-to-one with my boss, who was asking me how I planned to make up for the deficit. I said, "Find Jesus." She responded she'd given it a lot of thought and admitted not being able to think of anything on which I could be doing better, but used the "find Jesus" comment to later get me fired. In such a better role now, not only was worth it where I am now. Story 9. Worked in a government office where it's typical to wring hands, deny responsibility, and shift the burden onto citizens even if it's the state that made the mistake. I had a county prosecutor calling repeatedly trying to obtain some documents. It was a drunk driver case. The guy was facing down some serious charges, and they were trying to build their case and determine the extent of charges against him. Absolutely someone who needed to be put away. Everything in policy said they were entitled to it, but the person who normally furnishes it was constantly out with all manner of excuses. I finally got sick of putting it off, stalling them, making excuses for her. I pulled the info myself and sent it. That didn't break any laws or policy, but they decided to sack me for it because I'd overstepped. But I'd do it again. Story 10. Went into a business meeting for the ice cream shop. I managed Bold Stone. I was told that the girl that was 7 months pregnant needed to be written up as much as possible so they could have a legal reason to fire her. Told them it wasn't going to happen, and they suggested that I put in my 2 weeks and find other work. So I did. Then I was told that I was going to be gone in 2 weeks and might as well just fire her. Was no way in hell I would do that. I walked into that meeting with a 50-hour-a-week decent-paying job and left with nothing but my integrity. I then proceeded to drive to my store and pull the girl aside and let her know what was going on. Last I checked, I believe she manages the store now. Story 11. Was working in dialysis when another competing company came to town, effectively eliminating the monopoly my current company had on treating kidney failure. The company I worked for had already lost their physician group and was so afraid of losing staff and the patients that would follow them to the new company, they gave out huge retention bonuses. After receiving my bonus, I was fired for a manufactured problem beyond my control. I was hired by the new company, got a $10,000 signing bonus, and took a couple dozens patients with me to the new company. Got my picture in the new company's brochure they mailed out to all the dialysis patients, so they knew where I ended up. Just having a new company come to town to provide competition was also amazing for the patients. They got new heated massage chairs and new TVs with more channels and more staff to take care of them. The old company's dialysis centers across town that did not get competing dialysis units put nearby didn't give those patients anything. Story 12. I was working a full-time job and 3 part-time jobs. I worked every day, and on the weekends I would work nights. I rarely slept, and this went on for 6 months. One of the jobs was for the well-known lotion and scent store. The pay and hours really didn't make a difference, but I enjoyed working there. My manager was going out of town and was leaving a new supervisor in charge. I hadn't gotten to know all too well, and he did not like me for some reason. Well, the stars aligned, and I got a weekend off except for a morning shift with them. My manager, before she left, offered me the day off, but me knowing it would leave her shorthanded, I declined. She told me that if I overslept or was late, it was okay due to how much I've been working. So I go home that night and crash out hard. The feeling in my bed was the greatest thing. I set my alarms and out I went. I woke up over 30 hours later, not realizing I had slept through my shift until I saw the voicemail on my phone. The new supervisor had fired me and put me down as a no-call, no-show, which was rightfully so. I called the store and he refused to talk to me, so I called the manager and told her what happened. She said it was fine and would take care of it and to come for my next scheduled shift. Well, long story short, this little ass of a supervisor submitted my termination files to corporate and classified me as a no rehire. My manager was pissed and fired him shortly afterwards. The sleep was the best I had had in years and still on my top 10 sleeps. Totally worth getting labeled as a no rehire. Story 13. I worked at a radio station in the late 80s, part-time. The way up the ladder was that you got hired part-time. Then, as the full-time people moved up and out, you were slotted in for promotion based on how long you'd worked there. I'd worked my way up to the top of the part-time heap. The next full-time slot that opened was mine by virtue of seniority. But the next job that opened up was the midday show. That show had always been hosted by a female, and while I was next on the list, the job was given to a woman who'd worked for the station for a grand total of 2 weeks. She was terrible. It was unfair, and I expressed this in a letter to the program director. I got fired for having an attitude. It was the best career move I ever made. I walked out of that place with my head held high, and within a year, was working at a much larger station on my way to a career in major markets. Last I heard, my old boss is still there in charge of that little station. Story 14. I worked at a cafe chain known for soups, sandwiches, and salads throughout high school. I was good friends with exactly 3 people, but whenever our group got to close the store, it was always a fun time. We ended up taking the headsets for the drive-thru after that had closed, and we were just messing around chatting while cleaning up. There was a particularly attractive new manager that had been hired recently, and she was a bit of a hot topic between a group of high school guys. We were unaware that the store mics and cameras ran to an app on the manager's phone. We all got called in the next day. They didn't fire us. Oh no, it was much worse. The manager had a good sense of humor. She made printouts of our conversation and made us repeat it verbatim to the new hot manager, who was in tears laughing at how terrible we felt. Taught us a good lesson. Good managing right there. Story 15. I was a janitor for a year and a half after I got out of the military. I worked really hard, but my coworkers weren't nice to me and expected me to kind of clean up after them and do their jobs. A lot of them would come to work, clock in, and leave the building, taking essentially an 8-hour lunch, only to clock back out before it was time to leave. They got away with it because the supervisor was never there, and I did their job. One of them was really creepy, would wait for me at the bathroom, would always stare at me. It got pretty bad. I can understand socially awkward, but this person was kind of scary. He would follow me around until I told him to leave me alone, and the others were just really mean and exclusive towards me. They would exclude me during lunch, ignore me if I needed the key. One of them had to get the freight elevator. One took my iPod and hid it under a stack of papers. Told everyone they hid it and nobody told me. I got so sick of it. You know how there's mean girls? Well, these were mean boys. Towards the end, I would go home and cry. It got so bad. My sup was awful too. Didn't let me have a day off. Got mad that I gave him 3 weeks notice to quit when 2 were required. I had enough. I still had 1 week left of work, but I couldn't take it anymore. I took a paper from my soup's desk and wrote, "I quit," in bubble letters on the back. I took my sweet time making it pretty and left it on my soup's desk. I had enough. I felt so awful for the way I quit, and this isn't something I would normally do, but I reached my breaking point. Technically, I quit, but I doubt after that company will hire me again. Not that I want them to. I ended up working in the same building a couple weeks later in a much better paying position, and I picked up my last paycheck from my supervisor. He hated me for it and said he'd take my badge and escort me out. But the look on his face when I said I still worked in the building and worked in a much better paying position was glorious. I probably made as much as him in my new job. Want to add that shortly after I started my new job, almost the entire shift of janitors when I was working was replaced by other janitors. And rumor has it, the company I was now working for, that had contracted me and those other janitors, got upset with that shift I was working for not cleaning at all. The only person keeping them out of trouble was me, so it was kind of dumb of them to bully me into quitting. Although I was kind of dumb to let them bully me like that. when I didn't owe it to anyone to work for such a crap company. Story 16. I worked at HBO for a number of years. When I started there, it was amazing. Honestly, the best job I've ever had. The culture was conducive to doing excellent work and being productive while maintaining a 35-hour work week. But we were small, less than 100 people, and it's easy to maintain good culture with fewer people. Once we got bigger, things got worse. Bad people were put in charge, and I was a victim of that. I had a couple weeks of vacation saved up, plus the week that I didn't use the year before, and I requested to my manager to use it all in one go. See, my dog, the only family I'd had for the last 13 years, was dying of heart disease. It's a long and slow process, and she was in the final stages. She required 5 different medicines at 8 times throughout the day, and as I looked alone, no one else was available to give it to her. It took 25 minutes in good traffic to drive home, so driving back during the workday was something they now wouldn't permit. My manager was my former colleague, Greg. I made a formal request to use my vacation as I had just ended a project and was not yet on another team. Greg denied my vacation request, saying that it would be better I just put the dog down. Greg had a weird work ethic. He used work to escape his wife and child, and used to use me as an emotional outlet, telling me how he already has an escape plan from his family. To him, work was a way to shirk his familial responsibilities, and I think he expected the same of me. I went to his manager, Gilman, and made the same request. Gilman was Greg's immediate superior, and just a few weeks prior was mine as well. I knew him to be an amicable, busy, but fair boss, always willing to listen. However, in this instance, he refused to even look at me and said, "Take it up with your manager." Maybe that was his job now, to pass responsibility, but I lost a lot of respect for him when he did that. I made an appeal to HR that Friday, and we had a mediated meeting with Greg where he stood his ground, saying I was too valuable to the company and they just couldn't give me my vacation. I asked him if he knew what I was working on, and he said it was something very important. I told him I had finished the project that he was supposed to be overseeing, and I was simply fishing around for something else to work on. It didn't change his mind, and HR didn't help, so we left the meeting with the decision that I was not allowed to take any vacation time still standing. Greg, however, was going to Hawaii or Mexico or something that following week for a booze-filled romp on the beach. Privileges of status, I suppose. Letting work become the #1 priority in my life had already cost me severely in the past, and I had made a resolution to never let that happen again. So I went home that Friday and never went back. Greg had already had the termination papers drawn up, and they were filed in his absence. I was officially terminated at the end of day Monday for failing to show up to work. They didn't even pay out my unused vacation time. That was it for me. I spent the next 5 weeks taking care of my baby, going to the park and the lake nearly every day. She passed early in the morning while we were camping at the beach. I miss her severely, and I absolutely made the right choice. I kept in touch with some of my former colleagues. They told me that Greg started lying about his coworkers and people underneath him to Gilman, trying to boost his own position and ruin others. Evidently, he got a couple other people fired for his bullcrap before someone above him finally took notice, and they threw his ass out on the street. But damage done, and I've moved on. Story 17. I worked for Kmart for 6 months in grad school. It was hands down the worst place I've ever worked. I had a fellow employee have a customer hit him. People were always taking things from layaway to sell it to customers right then. So layaways always came up short. The call-offs were insane. I had a fellow coworker threaten to break my fingers if I didn't help him with something fast enough. Management threatened to fire me once for saying the word duck one time when no one else got yelled at for their constant cursing. And I always felt marginalized by everyone in management, but the store HR guy, because he and I were the only people at the store with bachelor's degrees already. I say all of this to give some proper backstory. It was my last day on the job, having put my 2 weeks notice and 14 days prior, having gotten a graduate assistantship. I'd been working both jobs and handling a full course load in that period. My last day came on the 1st of the month, our busiest time of the month. We had call-offs all over the store, and I ended up covering every department, except for front registers. For some reason, they couldn't spare one of the 4 people up there to help out in the other 95% of the store, and the pharmacy. I was stuck in layaway, with a line further than I could see. Lines 1 to 5 on the phone had me being paged to answer them, as the person covering the departments they were for, and someone kept hitting the button for service in electronics. Did I mention my final shift had technically ended 45 minutes before? My replacement was running late. Eventually, a woman who dwarfed my own sizable bulk pushed through the line and screamed at me that she had been pushing the button for 20 minutes. I apologized and said I had to help the people who were in line first. She then screamed that I couldn't be the only person in the store who was trained in layaway, so get someone back there to take my place so she could get what she wanted, an iPod. I responded that I was sorry, but I was the only person in the store at that moment that was trained in layaway. She then started demanding, "You stop helping this ducking Karen if you want me to spend my ducking money here." I looked directly at the woman I'd been helping, who had just been insulted and told her, "I'm very sorry. You were treated this way after waiting so patiently, ma'am. I'll be right back with your stuff." And then turned to the woman who was so angry. "I stopped working here 45 minutes ago, and I'm only here out of the goodness of my heart at this point. I don't give a duck if you spend your money here." I went upstairs and got the stuff for the woman who had waited patiently and apologized again to her. Then turned to face my suddenly present manager and the smirking face of the woman who had cursed people out. My replacement was right behind them, finally having shown and moved to take over the line from me. Manager pulled me aside and told me that I was no longer welcome in the store, given how I had treated this woman who cursed out the other customers and to get out, that I would never be rehired by Kmart again. Still felt good to not take that woman's crap after she cursed at me and cursed at another customer. And so 45 minutes after my last day on the job and having uttered "duck" a second time there, I was fired. In the end, I got the last laugh. That Kmart was closed within a couple of years, and just the other day, Sears Holding Company, the parent company of Kmart, and Sears filed for bankruptcy. Also, I looked out of curiosity on the way out. We didn't even have any iPods in stock. So a woman was getting angry over something that wasn't even in the case. Story 18. I started working at a chain restaurant as a line cook when they were opening a new restaurant. I was there before it opened. Now I went to culinary school, dropped out, but had that on my resume, and was told by the kitchen manager that they wanted me to be a line supervisor with my experience and such, but I had to start at the bottom and train at every station first. The first station was making salads and desserts. Fine, completely understandable, except they started me at that position's wage and I would get a raise with each station I moved up. Before we even opened, the trainer from out of state asked who it was who was supposed to be moving up when I wasn't around, and some banana bag said it was him, so they moved him to fryer. So I'm still stuck making salads and microwaving brownie desserts. Fast forward 3 to 4 months, and I'm filling in, working every station, expo, everything. But I'm still working salads and dessert if they didn't have anyone, and still being paid at that wage. Now I'm a 19-year-old, my best friend working the fryer. We're your typical guys, only working to please our parents and buy substances. After asking on 3 separate occasions about my promotion and being brushed off, I had enough. Another friend of mine who worked there worked prep and didn't have a ride home. He finished about an hour after I started at 5:30 to 6. I told him I'd take him, duck this place. So now I'm anxious just waiting for him to finish his shift so I can get the duck out of there and smoke the L I have in my car. Finally, the time comes. I walk back, grab my sweatshirt, and walk off the line, right past my kitchen manager. The kicker was I went to clock out because I'm definitely getting paid for that time. I'm there, and the VP of the company is in town from Florida and is standing right next to my GM as I clock out. I laughed the whole way home. The real icing on the cake came when I went to pick my best friend up at the end of the night when he was done with his shift. He was mad as duck. Turns out no one saw me leave and the printer just kept going off, order after order, with no one manning the station. He said they hit the floor from a shelf that's approximately 6 feet off the ground. When the servers finally freak out about what's taking so long, my boss goes running back and sees I'm not there. He asked my boy where I was, and he told them, "I don't know, I think he left." "He left? What do you mean he left?" "I don't know. He said duck this, put on his sweatshirt, and walked out. He walked right past you. He even said, 'Excuse me.' It was complete chaos. I wish I would have been there to see it." Going back to why he was mad though, they made him break down both his fryer station and my salad station, which I explained to him was exactly why I left. Duck bonefish. As a manager, if you have an employee not there, it is your responsibility to step in and do the work. That's why you make the money. That's why you made me train at every station. So I would be prepared to step in if need be. It's not his job for $1 over minimum wage to pick up someone else's slack. Duck that brought back some good memories. Story 19, my ex-manager here at the cinema. I can't fully tell his story because I wasn't directly involved, but did have to stand at trial for claims, etc. as a witness. He got fired over budgetary reasons. In other words, we don't like your face because you won't bend over when we tell you to, wage slave, just after he got cancer and had to take days off for treatment. Happened right around Christmas, so January 1st we come in, and he's officially off the roster, etc. Thing is, he never really took vacations, or days off even, as well as never claiming the extra hours he'd work here. Fixing cameras, projectors, computers, and databases, etc. Everything here is semi-autonomous. So over the past 30 or so years, he tallied up a fair bag of extra unpaid hours. Thing in Switzerland is, you can only claim the past 5 years as far as policy goes, so he did just that. It damn near bankrupted the company. They owe him around $60,000 and they still haven't paid up fully because of it. I see him now and then. He looks way better, less stressed out, and happier. Works with helping old people now in his free time and coaching kids play volleyball. Story 20. I was working in a warehouse with a woman who was normally very cheerful. One week she was looking a bit down, so as a lighthearted joke, I took a box roughly 10 inches by 10 inches by 15 inches and wrote "Caution Head" on it with some red marker and such and put it on her desk. Wasn't a great joke, but thought it'd at least raise a smile. Now, from context, I imagine you're thinking, no, this is a bad idea. And you'd be right. Woman came in, saw the box, and ran to the toilet crying. Turned out it was the anniversary of her brother's death, decapitated in a motorcycle accident. Everyone else knew, so they assumed that I did. No amount of arguing would convince them otherwise, and it wasn't worth dragging it out, so I left. But I'm okay with at least trying to be nice, even if it wasn't the right way of going about it at the time. Story 21. I mean, this definitely isn't a badass story like the rest, but I have been fired, and had it been worth it? I worked the same cashier job at a substances store for pretty much my entire time in high school. When management decided they weren't happy with something an employee was doing, they tended to punish employees by cutting their hours so much it forced them to find a new or second job. They would just fire people straight out, but they only really pulled out the punishment when the employee wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't enough to fire them over without getting into trouble. They were challenged and it was brought to the labor board. Pretty shady stuff and unfortunately all too common, at least at this store. I'm not the only person who was subject to this. But I digress. Management started to punish me in that way. And there are 3 major reasons that stick out in my mind as to why. 1. I had to take a week off of work to aid a family member in a crisis. Please keep in mind, I had never requested time off prior to this, not even a day or a shift change. And I was 17 at the time and already working very few shifts a week anyway. It wasn't the end of the world for them to fill my shifts. 2. One time as I was on my way out the door to go to my shift, I heard something very heavy fall on my cat. Turns out it was one of those metal police-issue flashlights that had slipped off a shelf and landed on her paw leg, which was clearly broken. I was by myself with no one around to help, and I obviously had to take her to the vet. So I called work to let them know that I would be late, but would likely be in and would update them. 2 hours in, it was pretty clear there was no sense in going in for what was left of my 4-hour shift, and the vet wouldn't let me take her home without someone there to monitor the cat in case she reacted to the pain medication she'd given her. So I obviously let them know I wouldn't be in. They were displeased. 3. I was a whistleblower of sorts in terms of the workplace health and safety. They were cutting major corners, and I brought it to the attention of the head of the company in the district, as we're told to do once we're hired. I kind of wrote it out, but once my 4 to 5 shifts a week got cut down to 1 to 2, I just stopped showing up, but for some reason they continued to schedule me and not really account for the fact that I wasn't coming in for probably a month, though I'd get called every time I missed a shift. The manager eventually called me and left a voicemail saying I was fired and telling me how hard they've made their life, but it honestly felt good to just treat them with the lack of respect they treated me with. It was a first job. It isn't even on my resume anymore. I was fine burning those bridges, and I'd actually made friends with one of the supervisors there, and they gave me a really glowing recommendation. So, Story 22. I worked for a small startup that does mobile neurocognitive testing and brain health solutions. It was interesting work, but the company was poorly organized and managed. Prior to me, they had one full-time junior engineer doing front end and a half-time senior engineer doing literally everything else. The default head of engineering was the CEO, a medical doctor who knew nothing about engineering or creative work. Already a good situation, right? Prior to being hired, they explained to me that they wanted someone to come in and eventually take over the engineering team as a CTO to be. I thought that sounded fun, and I knew a lot of ways to improve what they had, so I took the position. Over the coming months, I had managed to implement several sweeping changes that improved organization, increased efficiency, and reduced wasted time. Engineering was running well, and the company as a whole was running better. But there's this fatal mistake that people make when it comes to engineering work. They believe, counter to all evidence and research, that more hours equals more productivity. See, the CEO had given access to the production servers to her husband, not an employee of the company and not a programmer. He screwed things up, and we had to work through the weekend once to fix it. It needed to be done, no argument. However, it set a dangerous precedent. Working weekends gets crap done. As I was not yet the CTO, though I had been told I would be getting this soon, I did not have the authority to say no when the CEO insisted that we started crunching. I pushed my hours up to 50, and our part-time senior engineer started doing 80. The guy was a monster. In our second week of crunch, something happened. My coworker, the one doing so much overtime, required a strict regimen of medication to deal with some health issues. In his fatigue late one night, he mixed up his medication and passed out on the keyboard. His wife found him, could not wake him up, and he ended up in an emergency room. It was a pretty serious mistake, and as scary as it was to find him like that, she probably saved his life. I asked our CEO if she felt any responsibility at all for what happened. Her response, verbatim, with name changed, "No, not at all. Sean is a big boy and can take care of himself. While I don't disagree that he was a responsible individual, and we are all ultimately only responsible for ourselves, her setting arbitrary deadlines and saying the company will go under if we miss them, saying that we needed to work extra hours or we would all be out of a job ultimately, I feel, places some of the blame on her. Regardless, at the end of that conversation, I told her I would no longer be working overtime, and I would advise my coworkers to stop as well, that we would be returning to our normal engineering processes, which had been proven to be effective and productive. I was fired the following Tuesday. Story 23, Karen Bully manager kept extending our probation for no reason. She liked firing people, and having you on probation made it a lot easier. She made up some reason to extend mine. Honestly, I loved that job and did it extremely well. But I signed because I believed the BS she told me my work contract was up at the end of March. I kept asking about it, and they kept saying, oh, don't worry, we'll sign you on FT. Just in case, I put in a vacation request for June 3rd to 10th, and technically I only had to work 2 days a week. I was PT, but they kept giving me FT hours anyway. So the scheduler got my request in March, said she would book me off and no biggie since it was months away. Plus, I was technically not going to be working since I hadn't resigned to extend my contract. It's May 25th week, and by this time, the schedules are up for June already, and it shows I'm on vac for that 1 week. And my boss comes to me. Her, I'm not approving your vacation. Oh, I put it in months ago. I'm already booked off for it. Her, I don't care. I didn't approve it, so you're going to be working. Me, well, Elizabeth, I already paid for the cottage. Her, too bad. You shouldn't have paid anything until you got approved. I put in the request months ago. I paid for the cottage already, and I'm booked off in the schedule already. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but I'm going on my vacation. Walks away. I didn't like how that convo ended, so I emailed her asking to have a meeting to discuss the situation, as the following week would be my vacation. She agreed, came in a couple days later for my meeting, and was told by my coworkers that another girl, who was FT Perm, was fired that morning for no reason. I realized they were going to fire me as well. I recorded the convo with my cell and my purse. Got fired because my contact was up and I was still on probation. And I made sure to mention the last minute being told to cancel my vacation and how the probation was signed based on the BS she lied about before she left the room. The HR lady said because they won't be asking me to work the 2 weeks I'd be paid what I'm supposed to get, PT hours. I then stated, I've been working 44 hours weekly since I've been here, so I just want to make sure I'll be getting paid that for the next 2 weeks. She was not pleased as she was told I was only PT, but she agreed. She also got me a cab to go home. I tipped the driver like $50 so. I went on my vacation, had 2 weeks paid, and went on unemployment for the summer. It was ducking awesome story 24. Back when I worked at a tire shop that shall remain nameless, they had a few policies that I didn't agree with. First one being that everyone had to take a lunch break. When you work on the flat rate system, where you only get paid for the work you do, having to stop working for an hour can mean the loss of a lot of money. I understand making the people who get paid hourly take a break, but don't force those of us who work flat rate to stop working, because it gives the management a warm, fuzzy feeling. The other policy I don't agree with is that whenever a wheel is removed from a car, it has to be reinstalled in a very specific way, and 2 people have to sign off that it's torqued properly. That way, if the wheel comes off for any reason, both of the people who signed off that it was installed properly will be fired. Both of those policies combined with lazy coworkers formed a perfect crap storm that got me fired. I was on my enforced lunch break, which I would spend sitting in my car, since it was more comfortable to sit in than the break room. When I got back, there was a Toyota minivan sitting on the alignment rack, waiting for me to do a wheel alignment. The hourly people had replaced all 4 tires, and of course no one had bothered to sign off on the work. So I get my torque wrench and check all the lug nuts to see if they've been run down to at least the recommended torque, and they had been. I throw a signature on the paperwork, and then have the first hourly tire changer. I find sign off on it too. Fast forward 2 weeks, and when I arrived first thing in the morning, I was the first one to arrive. The manager showed up 10 minutes later, and the Toyota is sitting in a parking space where a tow truck had dropped it with the driver front wheel missing and all the studs broken. I knew I was going to get fired for it, and I really didn't care. That place was a soul-crushing place to work. And one of the best things about being an experienced mechanic is that I'll never be unemployed. Anyway, without putting too fine a point on it, the district managers called, the hourly guy who signed, just quit, and I got fired 2 days later. I was unemployed for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I got hired by a local dealership making $4 per flat hour more than the tire shop was willing to pay me, and they lost the only mechanic they had on staff. I drive past that tire shop from time to time. They're constantly looking for mechanics, and they can't seem to keep a manager for more than 6 months. I don't miss that crap hole of a store one little bit. Story 25. I work 2 jobs. My main one is Monday through Friday. and my second one is on the weekend. When interviewing, I stated to the second job, it will be strictly weekends only unless I said otherwise. And I also told them that my primary job may call me in for emergencies from time to time. They were hurting for people, so they hired me. Fast forward 2 weeks, the second place schedules me for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday. I let them know that there is approximately 0 chance I'll work during the weeks, and I reiterated to the person that interviewed me, same as scheduler, about strictly weekends only. He said, "Tough, we need you that day." Well, I said whatever and stormed out. I had a plan. The second job starts an hour before my main, so I show up Monday, get ready like I'm going to work for them that day. I get my route and load my van. I then leave the job to get to my second job while still punched into the first. I get a call around 8 a.m. asking where I was. I should have left to get on my route. Yeah, I told you I only work for you on the weekends, and I meant it. The phone, keys, and bags are in the van. It's loaded for whoever is going to take that route. Have fun dealing with that route. I'm sure big online retailer will love to hear why those packages won't be delivered. You're fired. This is so disrespectful and unprofessional. I respond in kind. I expect my check mailed to me. Enjoy your day. I was rehired for the next weekend, sans that scheduler. Story 26. I got fired from GameStop for making an innocuous joke on a packing slip. Ended up being one of the best things to happen to me. GameStop fired me for making an AOL reference on a packing slip. It was considered falsifying company documents or some stupid crap. I remember before I sent wondering if I should. I thought either the person wouldn't get it and move on, or get it and laugh. Nope. Some loser in Iowa got it and told their store manager, who then told her, and then it came back to me like a week later. First, my manager asked about it and just said, "Don't trust anyone you don't know to have a sense of humor." I thought that was the end of it. Then, the district manager showed up a few days later and started asking questions about it, which basically was just him asking me to admit it so he could fire me. The worst part about that was they just closed the store I was at, made us move everything to the store down the street, and I was supposed to lose my job and get like 7 to 8 weeks severance pay. Then the DM did was so I could keep my job and move people around, so I could go to the store. I moved everything too. I went from thinking I was going to get $4,500 to quit GameStop to getting fired a month later for bullcrap. I'm like 99.9% sure the DM just moved people around so I wouldn't get my severance. Because when I asked if I had to accept the new store, he immediately said no, but I wouldn't get severance. I probably could have made an argument about it being further away from my home, but having a job was more important. Getting fired ended up being the best thing to happen to me, though. I went back to an old job, then got another job doing electronic repair, which led to a series of better jobs. I never would have left GameStop for the job that led to these other jobs because it was part-time and paid left. On one hand, I have to say duck you to all the gets that led to me getting fired from GameStop because it was total bullcrap. On the other, though, I have to say thank you to them for kicking me out of retail and sending me down a career path that pays more than twice as much, with none of the I hate my life crap I dealt with at GameStop. No more Black Fridays, no more losing Thanksgiving, no more working on Christmas Eve, no more higher-ups caring about not getting enough profit off my back, no more gets careening about trade value. Also, duck their promotion process. Story 27. Worked at a tire shop, and just by a fluke of perfect timing, I caught the ass. MGR take an upskirt picture of a customer who was bent over looking in her trunk for a lug key. I broke his nose. They fired me, and it was absolutely appropriate to do so, and I don't even feel bad about it because they fired him too. Story 28. It is an Italian quiz show, and he had to fill in the missing words to compose the sentence. The sentence was about Amazon. The correct form was vinsero battaglie grazie alla loro mien foga, which means they won battles thanks to their ardor. He said vinsero battaglie grazie alla loro figa, which means they won battles thanks to their pussy. Mr. Giancarlo will always be remembered by the Italians as the man who, in place of vile money, preferred everlasting glory. Story 29. I walked out of my Best Buy job because I was being written up for not promoting a $60 Best Buy brand, Insignia, cable, that had a 100% fail rate. Apparently, I got secret shopped and didn't recommend the cable, which got me written up. During the write-up, I maintained that I knew the cable was faulty. We had sold 6, all 6 were returned and repackaged as open item on the same shelf. I'd even talked to a regular who had bought and returned one, and didn't want to ruin my relationship with my regulars by promoting a broken product. They told me it wasn't my job to decide what was and wasn't a good product. I was just to sell what they told me to sell. I asked if they wanted me to lie to the customers about the quality of the cable. They said no, they can't tell me to do that. So I said I would be happy to lie for them if that was their instructions. They said no, that isn't what they're saying. But if I didn't promote what they told me to, the cable, I would be fired. I told them that wouldn't be necessary as I quit and I walked out of the discipline meeting and out the door of the store. Story 30. I worked part-time in the 1-hour photo lab at a Meijer store while I was going to school. I was not trained to work, nor had I ever worked in any other part of the store. I was, however, the only one who did maintenance on the film developing machine, or the printers. I'd go in at 3 a.m. every Monday, get it all done, and make sure everything was ready to go by 8 a.m. when the photo lab opened. A few days before Thanksgiving, my grandmother dies in another state, and of course, I was really upset. I tell my manager that I'm going to the funeral, leaving the day before Thanksgiving, and will be back on Monday the following week. He says, "You have to work the day after Thanksgiving." I won't be here. That's the day of the funeral. You have to work that day, no exceptions. I'm not skipping my grandmother's funeral to work. You can't take the day off. I don't care. I left and went to my grandmother's funeral as planned. When I came back, my answering machine was full of increasingly angry messages from my manager asking why I wasn't at work. I didn't feel like dealing with his bullcrap right then, so I just went into work at 3 a.m. as usual. There was no note with my time card, so I punched in and set about tearing down the machines, draining the processing chemicals, etc. About 5 a.m. The machines are completely apart, and my boss shows up. He's pissed off about me not coming in and ignoring his calls. I reminded him that I had told him I was going to be at my grandmother's funeral. He told me I was fired, so I took off my name tag and vest, handed it to him, and left. I went to school and mentioned the incident to one of my professors. He offered me a job in his lab on the spot, and I eagerly accepted at some point. He must have realized that the machines in the photo lab were disassembled and non-functional because while I was at school, he left more messages on my answering machine asking me to come in and finish. I called him back. "Hey, can you come in and put the machines back together?" No. You fired me. Remember, I don't work there anymore." "Yeah, about that. I already have a new job. I start tomorrow." "Oh, good luck." Story 31. Got fired unjustly from a job I worked at for 25 years, a month after my dad died, who he himself had put over 30 years' time in the same company. After 3 months, the company decided it would be in their best interest to bring me back to work. Lawyer involved. Not gonna lie, those 3 months were a life-changing, soul-searching, stressful, scary, dark time in my life. The day before I'm to return to work, my wife and I sit down and she tells me that she thinks I should be a stay-at-home dad, that the money from the job was not worth the betrayal I felt from the company, that the family was secure financially, and that my mental and physical health is more important than a company that obviously doesn't give a duck about its employees. I went back to my job. For one day, I walked in before start time. I met all my immediate coworkers, told them goodbye, miss you, etc. I then went into the employee relations office, put my 2 weeks notice in and told them I would be using my paid personal time to cover the 2 weeks. This happened December of 2016. I am now the coach of my younger son's football team. I am also a member of the PTA, high school soccer booster, and I am the neighborhood handyman. My physical and mental health are still on the mend. It was a very difficult working environment, but my family and I are happier now. When I was still working, I remember telling my kids, "Good night, love you." I would get a normal night, love you too response. Now when I tell my kids good night, love you, they say it back, but it's different. They hug me a little bit tighter, hold on a little bit longer. The strengthened relationship between us is worth getting fired from any job. Story 32, kinda quit, kinda fired. While I was backpacking, I got a part-time job at a chain restaurant. I had management experience back home, but I wasn't looking for a management role there. I just wanted to carry food from one place to another place, maybe drinks as well. Somehow the current restaurant manager, aka chief plate carrier, heard that someone with more plate carrying experience was on the scene and was after her. She made my introductory shift a living ducking hell. She gave me half the floor to run. I didn't even know the table number layout, with 3 staff whose names I didn't even know. As you can image, the entire shift was a cluster duck, not only for me, but the poor patrons just trying to eat their dinner. As last orders were called, I tried to make sure all our customers were happy. Then I ripped off my apron. Yeah, it was the kind of place where the waitresses wear aprons. And name tag and threw it at the crap-stained restaurant manager. Story 33, we had a backstock area where employees would go to instead of the break room. We did literally whatever we wanted in there, including, but not limited to, throwing knives at the foam wall. Had been working with this company for about 4 years with never a word from management. They even participated a few times about it being unsafe or something to report. Naturally, by this time, I was a manager in training and decided to take my break back there one day. Another employee was back there when I walked in and was doing his thing with his knives in the wall. I casually join him as I've done plenty of times, and we go about our day after our breaks were up. An entire 3 weeks goes by until a normal Friday morning. I walk in and almost immediately get snatched by my manager, who tells me that they want to see me in the store manager's office. I go in and they sit me down and ask me what I was doing on the day of the knife throwing break. I'm racking my brain to think of what I might have done wrong, while at the same time giving them an incredulous look because I can't recall what I ate for dinner the night before. I politely tell them to quit wasting my time with the bullcrap guessing game and just get to whatever they pulled me in for, to which they pull up security footage of the employee and myself in the backstock area, doing exactly what these two have done before. They ask me, as a management trainee, why didn't you report this? You should have known better. Knowing where this is heading, I pull off my badge and hand it over to the store manager and tell him, go ahead and say the magical 2 words, "You're fired," and I'll leave. He does, and I leave. Call up a buddy who previously offered his extra 4-wheeler for the day, told him no originally because I had to work, and proceed to start the weekend early with some beer and 4-wheeling. I had plenty of money set away because I was planning on quitting soon anyway, so this was just icing on the cake for me. Story 34. While in college, I was a waitress at a small family-run Italian restaurant. Management was half-assed and never took our backs. Customer is always right, even when he is a grabby and verbally abusive a whole. He's bringing money in. I am costing them. Money is their mentality. We get entitled to holes from time to time, and having to deal with their verbal crap is bad enough, but grabby hands is too much. We had a table of 3 guys that were regulars, sometimes in together, sometimes in combination or with others. Always rude about service. Always accidentally brushing my ass. Used to snap their fingers and point at the table like I was dog expected to fetch their empty plate, or shout, "Hey, I need a refill over here still," as if they'd asked before and been turned down. One day they were in, making snide comments about the female staff and what they'd be like in bed while placing their orders and, oh yeah, accidentally brushing an arm over my breasts. I am so irritated, fail utterly to smile, but return with their drinks and later their food. It's a busy night. Guess what? You might get low on soda before I get back to you. No one else has an issue with this but this table. One guy snaps his fingers and points at his glass. I glare because I am so done with them and continue speaking with my table. Guy now whistles at me and shakes his glass meaningfully. I hold up one finger, not the one I wanted to let him know, 1 second please. I finish with that table and go get his glass and refill it and return. He says something about how he is glad to see I'm finally doing my job. Without a second thought, I emptied the glass over his head, dumped out the other glasses, and get your own ducking refill, jackass. Owner comes out of kitchen and fires me on the spot. I told him he was also a jackass for letting people abuse his staff the way he did. I then accidentally bumped those guys' table and knocked their food all over them on my way out. Story 35. I got fired from Walmart because I went 5 minutes over without clocking out to take a lunch break. I had gotten in trouble for being rude to a customer. I worked electronics. A customer asked me a question and I pointed her in the right direction. But because she couldn't find what she was looking for, I was tied to a register, so I couldn't really walk around. The customer said some negative things as she left, and in return, I wished her a good goodbye. I got transferred to furniture across the aisle from electronics. So one day, I'm building some desk or something. I get called to run a register up front as I'm trained. When I get leave from the register, I have near 0 time to clean up my mess made building such desk. I come in on my next shift and get fired. Story 36. At university, before holiday break. I'm a man and I worked as an RA. I have a female friend who worked in a different dorm. During finals week, she enlisted my help to write nice messages on the windows to de-stress and make residents laugh. I complied. Since it wasn't really an event, it being just the 2 of us, she didn't write it as an event. We used an easily removable window crayon. I wrote "You're beautiful" on the gender-neutral bathroom mirror in the corner so the mirror could still be used. I wrote other things like "Good luck on finals" and "Study hard," "Pain is temporary," "GPA is forever," and the worst thing I wrote was "I have a girlfriend, every cute boy ever." These were just little things to make people smile during a long week. My friend wrote similar things, none of which were bad by any means. Well, I got called into my HD's office and the cops were there waiting for me. I was told I had vandalized the entirety of a dormitory. I was told I'd have a chance to defend my actions, and I did, but was still fired. I then chose to appeal to the residence life director. In my appeal, I brought with me a window crayon, wrote what I wrote on the window, and asked the director for a Kleenex, and wiped it off clean. He told me I was wasting his time, and I had my job back. But that wasn't enough for me. I told him the story about how he'd had 2 great employees nearly permanently fired for doing their job. Hint, it was all a power struggle from other RAs that weren't as successful, and other HDs picking favorites. No other good news came from this story, but I had the opportunity to tell my HD to duck off and tell him that his inability to decide what is bad and what is good will cost him the promotion he was trying so hard to get, which it did. I had other RAs file formal complaints and even sent a letter to the editor of the school and local city newspaper. Never got an apology, never needed one. Duck that place. I was so over being an RA after that. Story 37. I ran a retail establishment in a mall. I had 3 full-time assistant managers and about 15 part-timers. I was salary. They were all hourly. If 5 p.m. rolled around on a Saturday and we had not met the sales goal for the week, I had to call off 2 part-timers and work their shift myself to save 8 hours of payroll. This was after an already full 50 to 55-hour work week. I also had an assistant that was getting married and planning to quit in 2 months. Part of my performance ratings that determined if I got a raise annually was how I allocated time training my assistant. Since I knew Lacey was quitting, I didn't bother spending training time with her. But the district manager did not know she was quitting because the job sucked really bad and I was stressed out of my mind trying to cram 100 hours of work into 50. I was looking to get out. I told another assistant, Micah, I was going on an interview because I thought she understood. Turns out she called the district manager to tell him I was at an interview and that I wasn't training Lacey. Yes, Micah knew about Lacey quitting too. He got mad that I was disloyal and fired me. Up until that point, I was one of the top 10% of managers in the 1,500 store chain. I was pissed and felt betrayed by Micah, but I got over it pretty quick when I found a job paying twice as much, with no stress and no retail hours. Micah had the nerve to call me the first Friday night after I left. She had gotten promoted to my spot, to demand why I never told her all the crap I had to do for the company, and to ask for advice on handling it all. Most satisfying comment of my entire life, Micah, do me a favor and tell me if this sounds like someone hanging up. And I hung up. Story 38, worked at a Quiznos type place, oven-baked subs to order, calzones, soups, etc. I started the summer before my senior year of high school. I liked the 2 shift managers I had. They liked me because I worked hard and didn't waste time cleaning on closing shifts. So this place isn't doing well, and the turnover rate is huge. The GM owner was a banana to everyone, refused to listen to issues and never took advice. In a 3-month period, 10 people had been hired, and then fired or quit before I even had a shift with them. Towards the end of the year, I had certain obligations as a student that required me to ask for a day or 2 off. It's against the law to prevent a high school student from those things by scheduling them then or threatening to fire them if they don't show. The boss did everything by paper, so if you wanted time off, you had to write a note and leave it on the desk. Well, conveniently for him, he didn't see my requests every once in a while and would schedule me during a time I wouldn't be around. My managers were chill, though, and would cover for me when that happened. I finally had enough. When I requested 2 days off, back-to-back in the middle of the week, not even busy days, I come in on Friday for my check and schedule and see that I'm scheduled on only those 2 days. I came in Saturday for my closing shift, and after we locked up, my manager said, "All right, see you in the morning," and I told him, "Nah, I quit. Sorry." He looks at me and says, "I'm so glad you are. The GM told me if you showed up tomorrow morning to fire you before you clocked in." Yeah, that's the kind of a hole he was. Epilogue. Both shift managers quit about a month after that, leaving the GM to work the store with his lazy son. Found out about a year later, it was under new ownership and business is doing pretty well. They even rehired one of the old shift managers. Story 39. I used to be a barista at a higher-end grocery store. I was running late for work, but I had to pick up my check. Didn't have direct deposit at the time, so I could deposit it and pay my phone bill. Normally when we park, we're told to park in the back so customers can park in the front. This is an unwritten rule. So there's 2 open spots at the front. A car pulls into one, I pull into the one next to it, no issues or anything. Get out of my car and start walking into the store to pick up my check. When out of nowhere, for literally no reason, a lady coming out of the car next to me says, "Nice X uniform," in the snottiest, most entitled way possible. X equals store I worked for. No time for nonsense today, I said, "Thanks," and kept walking. I continue walking. Now I'm about 20 feet from the store entrance, about 50 feet from snide lady, and she takes it upon herself to scream out to me, "Nice XXX uniform." Salt overload. Without thinking, I screamed out back to her, "Suck. Dang. Okay, let me find my manager and tell them the really dumb thing I just did. Cannot find manager, getting super late, need to collect check. Accounting office, just past customer service. Where lo and behold, snide rude. For no reason, lady screams, "I'm telling a manager." Salt still reigns supreme. I don't give a duck at the top of my lung. Walk towards accounting office. A wild snide husband appears. Snide lady's snide husband says someone needs to teach me some manners and to step outside. Anger takes over. Throw my jacket on ground. Comply. Tackled by several fellow employees. Taken to assistant store manager office. Fired. Absolutely worth it. I don't know what makes people think they can talk down to service employees, but they're people too, working their jobs to make a living. You don't know what the rules for the store are, lady, and there was no reason for you to make snide remarks. Go about your business. Found a new retailer job the next day. Still shop at that grocery store from time to time. Story 40. I worked in a care home for nearly 2 years and then found out I was pregnant. We had a new senior career who took offense to me starting a family because being pregnant restricted what residents I could work with, volatile, violent, unpredictable. She had me move to activities, which I hated because it wasn't what I went into the job for. I received a call on my way home one day saying there had been a complaint about me abusing a resident, and I was suspended until the investigation was done. Turns out, apparently, I had belittled a lady and told her she's pissed herself, and to hurry up and get back to her unit because she stank. Guess who put that complaint in? The senior carer who disliked me. Thankfully, there was many people around who said, that's not what happened. So when she didn't get me sacked for that, she tried playing on my personality disorder and said, I was a risk to residents because I'm unstable now. I can't take my medication because I was pregnant. Management said I hadn't told them of my mental health problems when I had my interview, or they wouldn't have hired me. I told her to pull out my file and lo and behold, there was many records of my mental health and a care plan on how regular meetings are to be had to see how I'm coping. Mind you, before I was pregnant, I was left to run my unit on a night shift practically on my own because we was so short-staffed. In the end, they kept me suspended until my maternity leave, and then when that was finished, we had a new manager and the senior carer had been sacked for neglect. So they wanted me back. I told them to duck off. So technically I wasn't sacked, but they sure tried their hardest to get me gone. It wasn't just me that happened to. In the 2 years I was there, 4 women, including me, were either suspended or sacked when they announced their pregnancy. Story 41. Starbucks. For reference, it is incredibly hard to get fired from this company. There are many people who come to work and sit on their phones performing the bare minimum. I was a closer, closing the shop up and performing all cleaning tasks, etc. Usually there was 3 or 4 people, depending on the day working, one of which usually called out. A lot of the time, I ended up doing a lot of the work, especially the physical and gross stuff like drain cleaning and bathrooms. I brought this up multiple times to the manager, then took it upon myself to create a task list in order to better delegate tasks to coworkers, mostly to make it easier on myself. Well, another stores manager comes in, sees my list and how confident and properly I do my work, all while multitasking and doing multiple roles in a busy store. She asks if I want to be a shift manager at her store on the spot. Having never met me and only watching me for 30 minutes of work, she gives me her card and I tell her I'll be in touch. One of my other salty-ass coworkers hears this and rats it out to my general manager. Apparently, this isn't kosher in the company, and the whole thing falls to shambles. My general manager then does everything in his power to indirectly make me miserable at this job, from things like scheduling me with frequent no-showers to making it difficult for me to store transfer and plenty more. I eventually am just finally over the job. I'm overqualified and overworked, and I leave. I know there's a word for this method of making an employee want to quit. I am probably one of the best employees they may have ever had, having had a perfect attendance for 2 years, and being the favorite coworker of anyone who wasn't lazy / a no-shower. Not necessarily fired, but I still have 0 regrets about leaving. Still looking for a job, but I'm in no rush to put myself in such a negative position again. Story 42. So technically I quit, but here's what happened. I was working for a contract security company whose biggest accomplishment was getting FDR's second vice president in office by strategically placing protesters in a way they didn't have the voice they needed. So I worked at a site of a big logistical company, and they didn't want to pay more than the $10.50 per hour rate. But no one wanted to work there for $10.50 per hour, and those who did only did so because of lack of other opportunity. So when people quit, they couldn't find others to get hired on, mainly because they didn't offer the licensing training. They essentially offered the minimum competitive security wage in the state, but didn't offer the proper training to get or maintain the licenses required for security officers. Since people quit and no one new was hired, we still needed bodies there to keep the contract. I was working 92 hours a week, working MF 1,400 to 612 hours on Saturday. I was drinking so much caffeine, my chest was feeling tight, and even then I was barely conscious. This insane schedule went on for 3 weeks, and during that time, more people quit. Due to availability, we only had 1 person for Sunday evening when we needed 3. So I was told that I needed to do another 12-hour shift on top of my other 92. I said no. I was told that there wasn't anyone else who could. So I was forced to take the shift. I replied saying there were other officers getting less than 60 hours who could take the shift instead. They told me they refused, and I needed to take the shift. If said I wouldn't show up for it. Then they said I would be terminated for insubordination if I didn't show. I didn't show. I was called 4 times, all went to voicemail. I was in the hospital suffering from a mild cardiac event from all the caffeine. I'm doing better now, but it was an intense week in the hospital. Story 43. Obligatory not me, but a friend's story. He was working downtown Indianapolis on the 30-something story of one of the tallest buildings in Indiana. He walks into his office, and armed security is already there. He is getting let go. He had a small box with some personal items in it, and his plan was to go to his neighborhood pub and get crap-faced. Before he did that, he stopped at a cafeteria a couple of floors away. He had worked there for 11 years and knew everyone, to say goodbye. While saying goodbye, an acquaintance from another couple of floors away saw his box of personal items, and asked what happened. He told him he was let go. He asked, "You're a programmer, aren't you?" "Absolutely," was my friend's reply. "Come with me," the acquaintance replied back. He went with him. Long story short, he was interviewed and hired 2 hours later to start on Monday. He really wanted to take some time off, but they were adamant that he start on Monday, so he did. But he still went to the pub after getting 4 months of severance pay, and he still got crap-faced. Now for the best part. Monday morning, he is going to work for the new company, just 4 floors away, and he gets on the elevator at the same time as his old boss. "Where the hell are you going?" old boss asked. "To work," my friend replied. "The hell you are. I fired you Friday. Don't you get that?" "Hey," my friend replied. "I didn't say I was going to work for you, a whole. So yeah, you 4 months of pay, you get immediately hired, don't have to change your downtown parking situation, spend the afternoon getting crap-faced at your local pub, get a sizable raise, and you get to tell off your old boss in public on Monday morning." As Ice Cube put it, gotta say it was a good day. Story 44. I had been hired as manager of a lightning store. They told me I had white card for the showroom, schedule, and employee affectation. After 6 months, I couldn't still change anything in the showroom, couldn't adjust the schedule to be more profitable for the store, nor I could fire an employee who made her own schedule. Call in at 9 a.m. to say I'll be here at noon today. I've been out late yesterday night. Since I've worked in a couples of worldwide enterprise, I had a good grasp on how and where to save money from a management point. To help, I created a complete business case with complete restructuration of his methods. I've been told, don't try to teach me anything. I've been at Tattoo for 30 years. I know all I have to know. At this moment, I knew I wouldn't work for long there. So I literally stopped managing. I was sitting on my computer, answering clients, of course, but I stopped giving time also. The owner asked me to be in at 6 a.m. and out not before 7 p.m. Still paid 40 hours, you know. They demoted me from manager to salesman and put another employee as manager, which he haven't any prior management experience. They were still acting with me as if I was the manager, and my answer was, go see Richard. He's the manager. I guess he know better than me what to do. Then I'd go to the floor to sell. They fired me without valuable reason, so I got them with the CNEST, Quebec's labor standards, and they had to rehire me, which they didn't. So I got back to the CNEST again, and they had to pay me 6 months' salary and have a violation case with the CNEST. Now, I'm a customer service quality assurance in a worldwide IT company. Story 45. I waited tables at a restaurant bar, and this drunk chick tried to chuck a hot fajita skillet at me with no success. I then threw her drink right back at her and the guy she was next to. I kind of felt bad because the guy seemed nice, but sometimes there are casualties in war. Story 46. Got 2 stories. In one I was fired, and the other I quit. First one, I was 18, just got my first real job at a law firm. About 3 months in, I got super sick, to the point where I couldn't even get out of bed. My mom had to force soup down my throat. It was a nasty viral infection, and I lost 25 pounds. It was that bad. I had doctor's notes and a letter saying I needed to rest and recover for 2 weeks, and I couldn't be around other people. When I came back, I was let go because of cutbacks. Yet another person was hired. Not sure they know what cutbacks mean. Or they ducking lied? I think it's the latter. Totally worth it, because I'm alive and didn't get anyone else sick to the point of almost dying. Second story, I was working as a stock boy in a prominent baby store in Manhattan. We kept all the merchandise in the basement, on wooden pallets and shelves, because at some point or another, there had been flooding down there. Under these pallets were years and years of dirt and dust and grime, and a few rat carcasses as well. So all of a sudden, they want this crap cleaned up. Why now? Why? This has been here for years. There have been many stock boys before me. Why now? I think it was because I was always helpful and nice, maybe too much so. Anyway, they keep pressing the issue, after I kept saying duck no and nicer words, of course. Their response was, well, they corporate, I don't ducking no. Once it clean, it's gonna come up. Mine was not happening. I'm not touching that stuff. After the 3rd week of back and forth, I noped the duck out of there. Let it be the next guy's problem. Story 47. Was accused time and time again of stealing money from the tills at a pub I had been loyal employee of for almost 2 years if they were. Ever short on staff, I'd be the first to show up. They did a full-scale investigation of me and found I never stole. Yet every shift I'd have a finger pointed at me for taking something out of the tills. One time I was giving a customer change and my manager started shouting at me for taking money out of the till, not realizing I was serving someone. After approximately 6 months of these accusations, I finally lost my rag and asked one manager, "Why have you suddenly turned into such a recently?" He flipped his crap, had a meeting 7 days later, and got the sack. Funnily enough, the other manager that formally sacked me didn't want me to go, so he made sure I got paid 100% of my holiday pay, which I wasn't entitled to. Not surprisingly, within a few weeks after I got the sack, most of the other staff at the pub got fired too, leaving only 2 members of staff behind. The manager I called A and one waitress. Turns out they were getting new management in and wanted to start fresh with new staff. Story 48. Due to an industrial accident, I had my hand hit in a machine. The company put me on light duty upon my return to work. They had me doing the equivalent of screwing a nut on a bolt. While sitting at my station, I was using my left hand to massage my right hand as it was hurting and fatigued. A supervisor confronted me and asked me what I was doing and if I was going to do any work tonight. I simply snapped and lost my mind. I told him that what I was doing at the moment was thinking about shoving one of these parts right up inside. I got progressively louder with each word. People at the other stations around us scattered. Another shift supervisor made a dash to the office and called police. When they arrived, we were nose to nose arguing. I was trying to get my supervisor to hit me. The police took me off the property and I went to the bar. The next morning, I was fired over the phone and told on no uncertain terms I was not to return to the property or I would be arrested. Friends told me that they hired armed security to patrol the building and grounds. They also moved the HR lady's office from an outside wall to an interior office in the building. They were afraid that I was going to drive my car right through her office, which was located in a corner unit at the end of a long driveway. This was roughly 25 years ago when going postal was just becoming a thing. Absolutely worth it. Story 49. I worked in HR. Several employees came to me to complain about one of my peers and how she was ignoring how a manager was being racist to our customers. I told my manager and her response was that my peer was doing the best that she knew how to. But I knew my peer was a complete idiot who was looking out for her friend, the manager, and not the employees. Ultimately, my peer facilitated the termination of the first guy who initiated the complaint, and the others were put on performance improvement plans. I was livid, and at that point I realized the department did not care about the employees. So from that point on, any employees that came to me for concerns, I give them insider tips on how to get away with things while technically not breaking the rules. The last straw was when I told an employee who was quitting in 2 weeks to use sick time to take off the days that she had planned for vacation. Her concern was that she would get in trouble, and I reminded her that she already put in her notice. They were not going to fire her 2 days before the day she planned to quit anyway. A few weeks after that, I was laid off due to a lack of funds. I was devastated because I had never been fired before, so I cried in my boss's office. She was so uncomfortable with that, she told me that I could take the rest of the day off and go home early. As soon as I got in my car, I could not stop laughing. I hated that place. Story 50. Got fired. So I went to the court and sued my former employer because he refused to pay me my last month's salary plus 1 month's severance pay. When the subpoena arrived at my employer's front door, he emailed me saying that I was wrong and that I didn't understand the laws, and he was looking forward to seeing me before the court. On the court day, he didn't show and send his attorney to settle the due balance for my salary. Man, how I wish I could have seen his face when he found out he was wrong. It's pretty much the only sub-ideal part of the story. Story 51. Worked as a telemarketer. Local calls to subscribers of a service. Boss was abusive as hell, taking out his frustrations on employees by angrily berating them. After he did this to a nice girl that worked there, I was mad and knew I was going to quit. So I called my mom, who was in Japan at the time, and just had a long casual conversation until he stormed out of his office and fired me. Story 52. In a meeting where I was told the pay rose that year was 20 pence an hour. I was on minimum wage anyway, and a month later, the government was upping minimum wage by 50 pence an hour. So it literally was not a pay rise at all. I went on a 5 to 10 minute rant to the MD about every problem I had about working there and how it was his job to bring new work in. He was accusing me of being lazy because I wasn't doing enough work, when there wasn't much work to do anyway, and that the way he treated all his employees was unacceptable. I was then fired on the day after, which I'm still fairly sure is a case for unfair dismissal, but duck it, I managed to find a better paying and better job in 2 months anyway. So yeah, totally worth it just so he could hear what he needed. My friend who worked there for a few more months said the boss tried to change things for about 2 days before it went back to normal. Shame it didn't make much of an impact, but I think I just went about it the wrong way. Story 53. I used to work at Domino's Pizza, and the store I worked at was appalling, dirty, unsanitary, crappy management. The works. So about a week in, my boss added me to a group page on Facebook where employees would swap shifts and the boss could talk to us all. And one day she posted pictures of the state of the kitchen and telling us to clean it as we had the big boss paying a visit. So I took a screenshot of her post and posted it to every Domino's Australia page, message board, Twitter, etc. My boss found out and promptly fired me, but a few days later I saw that the shop had closed down while it looked for new staff and management. Not only did I get myself fired, but I also got about 15 other teenagers and adults fired. Not too bad if I say so myself. Story 54. I was working as a CNA, certified nurse's aide, back in the early 90s, and I like to have fun with the residents. On day, my administrator found me in a hall, wheelchair racing with several other elderly participants who were intent on kicking my ass. I was fired on the spot, citing safety issues. Whatever, dude. Story 55. Didn't get fired, but came incredibly close. My manager told me that the only reason I wasn't canned was because he liked me, and we couldn't lose a second service desk employee in a week. Working service desk at the start of the shift, we had a woman who wanted me to show her how to do pivot tables in Excel. You're an accountant. How the duck are you doing your job without pivot tables? I told her it'd be a bit, as there were a couple callbacks I needed to make. We get a network outage at one of our biggest locations that caused a total work stoppage. So I'm either on the phone or trying to put out fires, talking with lab office managers to see if they could redirect cases to another location nearby. Super stressed, super busy. The woman comes and pounds on our office window, so I put a call on hold and go to explain what's going on. But before I can explain, she says very angrily, "I would have assumed you'd have worked me into your schedule by now." I'm Max the duck out, and without skipping a beat, respond, "That's why smart people don't make assumptions. I'll come find you when I'm done." My manager overhears that, and as soon as she leaves, he starts laughing. About an hour later, he comes and tells me she sees the CIO. Our location was the ET headquarters for our company, and this woman had decided a ducking C-level needed to know about our exchange. Duck you, Mary. Story 56. There are 3 or 4 companies that run EFL schools in East Asia and have a "you work a year or we garnish your wages" policy. I worked for one in Taiwan. Before starting, I'd carried out extensive research into whether or not that's legal. It's not, and not just in Taiwan. I decided to very politely give 6 weeks notice, but pointed out the law, which is specifically against the garnishing of wages. No dice. She's doing it anyway. Genski guide, you can't just leave the country. You need to pay your taxes. They'll stop you at the airport. I'd put aside my tax money to give to them to hand in, as they'd neglected to extract it from my income. They didn't want it, yet because they had a tax scam going on. Pretty common in Taiwan, not the hugest deal. More research later, it turns out to get me stopped at the airport, they need to prove their business is in order, including taxes. Okay, I'll stay 6 weeks, I say. I fly out 3 weeks later. I feel bad until I remember she literally broke the law to manipulate me. If you're planning a move to East Asia, avoid companies with that rule. There are literally dozens of others. Story 57. Wife was due with our first daughter. Company asked me to go on 2-week trip that overlapped due date. Told them it wasn't going to work for me. They then offered a single-week trip that still overlapped and told me to choose one or the other. I chose to cut the umbilical cord. I'm sure they broke the law, but it wasn't worth the fight. Had some cash put away and spent the next couple months changing diapers until I was ready to put my skill set back to work. Thank goodness I had the abilities that finding work wasn't hard. Story 58. The summer between high school and college, I took a factory job where I honestly turned dust into blocks of dust. I was given weekly reviews from my shift supervisor on how he felt I was doing. Weeks 1 through 9, I was given 10 out of 10 across the board. He loved how I was working. Around week 8, my machine started slowing down on one step of its process. That step should have taken about 2 seconds, and it was taking 15 to 20 seconds, approximately 500 times per shift. Supervisor acknowledges the problem, has maintenance spend an entire day taking the machine apart to fix it, but they can't find anything wrong. I am told to keep using the machine and do what I can with the slow down issue. Last day of my last week, I get my weekly review, refuses to meet production goals. Horrible attitude, suggests we terminate him. I laughed a little when asking when he planned on firing me, since he knew I was done at the end of that day in about 2 hours. He just sort of stared at me as it dawned him that I was telling him to shove it. I told him it's fine with me if you need to write up some BS to make yourself look good to your boss. Keep up the good work here. I'll just call it quits now. His reaction was definitely worth the $16 I skipped out on. Story 59. Not me, but one in my confectioner's class, but he left before I started, so maybe a urban legend. He wanted out of his apprenticeship, so he got into one of the giant coolers, the one with like 5 degrees Celsius temperature, sat down and began to eat a fully finished, fully paid, expensive wedding cake, waiting for someone else to enter the cooler. Story 60. 5 months before I got fired, my husband died unexpectedly. We had 2 young children, the oldest of which was having all kinds of emotional issues. I was seeing a psychiatrist and therapist for PTSD. I was taking the kids to therapy once a week as well. I went back to work at the 6-week mark, but I was having trouble dealing with everything. But I was trying. I was not the same employee I was before. Instead of exceeding my sales goals every month, I was just meeting them. A week before I got fired, I went to my boss to explain my PTSD diagnosis and ask if there was any way we could discuss a decrease in my hours to help me cope better. It was a mom and pop store, so she was HR. He told me that I should just get the duck over it already. I obviously wanted to quit right then and there, but I was not in a place financially that made it possible. I also couldn't take a complaint to HR. The next week, I got a call from the school and had to leave work to take care of daughter. I missed the following day as well. That evening, he called and fired me. My unemployment was what my base salary before commissions was, which was all I needed to get by. It was the perfect break to help me and the kids heal. People who've been fired someone on the first day. Why? What happened? Story 1. I got work on a milk run. We had radio headsets so that I, the kid in the back of the truck, could be told exactly what needed to be delivered where, without needing to read off a list. I was doing okay until I jumped off the back of the truck and ran to do my delivery when my mind went blank. I was holding 8 liters of milk for 5 different houses and had no idea what went where. Perfect time for the radio headset to stop working. I begged for assistance, but nobody replied. The truck had already moved 1 street down. There were 3 boys in the back of the truck delivering simultaneously. When the truck returned to pick me up, I was still holding all the milk. The headset died, I explained. You're fired, he said. Story 2. We hired a totally green apprentice electrician. The guy had some classroom time, but had never worked on a construction site. We give him a safety vest and hard hat and send him to a job we have running about 15 minutes away from the office. About an hour and a half later, he is back in the office, red eyes and a very sad look on his face. It's obvious he had been crying. Turns out, he showed up on the job site, was given a bit of orientation, then asked to take a 6-foot ladder and pull the plastic bags off all of the new light fixtures that were hanging. He got 2 rungs up the ladder and started freaking out and started bawling. Turns out he has a severe fear of heights. How can someone who has been studying to be a commercial electrician not know 40% of the work is done overhead? He was given a pat on the back and shown the door. Story 3. This is my best firing story ever. So I am what would be considered a shift manager at a birthday party destination for kids. I have worked here for 6 years, and we operated without a general manager for a long time. But my boss begins to start work at another company, so he gets a general manager, passing me over for the position, but I'm still in school, so it's really whatever. I end up training the general manager, who we will call Jackie, alongside my boss. Jackie ends up hiring a bunch of new employees that are kind of shady. Well, I take off for a week. When another employee is training, one of the shady kids calls me and says she left the store open with just him and needs me to go in to help him close because it was his first time closing and you get supervised the first time you close. So I complain, but end up coming in after this kid has been left alone for maybe an hour. And when I walk in, I see him pocket a transaction. I ask him what he is doing, and he said Jackie had told him one of the perks of the job was you get to take $30 home from the drawer every time you work, but she has to get $10 of it. So here's the best part. I had been telling my boss it is very easy to steal from his store, and he had to change 2 little things to make it not as easy. Jackie hears me telling him and asks me to show her how to do it so she can implement the changes. So I showed her how to steal. Then she goes and tells the new staff how to steal as long as she gets the cut. The kid who was stealing was fired immediately after showing me where he would leave Jackie's cut. Not really his fault, that he was told it was part of the job, but he was still technically stealing. So I take her stash, which is well over $1,000 from its hiding place, and show everything to my boss. He fires her, and I get $250 of her stash for my honesty and hard work. Then it gets even better because she ends up hearing that I got the $250 and calls me and tells me I should split it with her since I got her fired and stole the $1,000 she had been saving. Story 4. This happened to me the other day. I was hired as a bartender for an upcoming restaurant. Flash forward 2 months, and they begin doing the whole corporate training thing. Boring as crap, but I'm there. I sit through the 5 hours of them forcing us to read line by line like we were elementary school kids. Eventually, we broke off into groups. However, I was put with the servers. Note, I had specifically told them I was only interested in a bartending position and was hired as such. I asked why, but rolled with the punches. Cracked a few jokes, tried to start making friends, the 9. I did notice, however, that all the bartenders were short, very pretty girls. And during our break, I heard them talking. Very few of them had ever been behind the bar. They were mostly shot girls. Not that there's anything wrong with that. but this is supposed to be a high-end restaurant in a casino/hotel. Most of my work experience is in 4-star restaurants, fine dining, and casinos. Red flags were raised, but I continued to roll. At the end of the presentation, I went to ask the GM about my work uniform. They had a strict no visible tattoo policy, and the sleeves were too short to cover mine. He dodged the question, asking me to wait for the rest of the people in line behind me to talk to him before we could speak. Then the room cleared out, just me, him, and the banana kitchen manager. I was confused. At this point, I had shaved my beard for these duckers. I had been there once before to do paperwork, and was worried they were going to come down on me for my ink, which was comparatively less than many of the other employees, and only on my upper biceps, and would have been solved by a bigger shirt. Then, there we were. I'm sorry, but you don't fit the image and presentation we want to project. We won't be needing you. You can turn in your uniform in 2 weeks when you pick up your check. I honestly don't know why. I participated in their activities. I wasn't disrespectful or rude, and I already had a better knowledge of the menu than most of the kitchen staff did. Honestly, how do you not know what brioche and pico de gallo are? My guess is because I'm a bit on the heavy side, maybe? But my bar skills are pretty sharp. I'm now employed at a retro speakeasy renowned for our craft cocktails, and I've got experience to burn. Felt good to laugh in their faces and tell them to have fun when they need a keg changed, though. Story 5, I was assistant manager of a fairly large department store's men's better section. Better equals polo, Kenneth Cole, etc. Sketchy kid walks in with his name tag in hand, not on his shirt, and looks at me with disgust. This'll be good, I thought. Seemed like his folks made him get a job and he was doing it to appease Mooch more than anything. Actually, it wasn't too crafty of a worker, but I did have some attitude misconduct from him. Went on his first break of his first shift, 2 hours in, walked to the back of the store, normal as Locker's employee area was back there, and ran out the front, security giving chase. Turns out this little spoiled a hole had only taken the job to shoplift. He had on 2 Ralph Lauren polos under his button-down dress shirt. I came to find out later, he put them on in the dressing room and walked into the employee area where our plainclothes security, which he hadn't met yet, were waiting. Oops, story 6. Sweet, a question I can answer. Last time I said, "Don't duck up, Eugene." Then I ducked up and people made fun of me. That being said, I was 17 years old and lazy as duck. My parents decided it was time for me to get a job, so they gave me the choice of either getting a job or finding another place to live. I decided to get a job, which was kind of hard. I applied at a local supermarket or grocery store called Metro, went back there 3 different times and finally got an interview. Ducking, yes, I can stay home and play Halo again. Go into the interview, nail that Karen like crazy, and get the job. Time comes around for my training and I catch a cold. I decided to go anyway because it's my first job, and that wouldn't look so good if I called in sick before my first shift. During my sick time, I looked like I was high out of my mind, even though I never smoked in my life. I was completely zoned out. The supervisor that was training me was about 22 and was just a complete idiot. Swore twice on my shift because her coworker was pulling pranks, etc. Fast forward, it's Saturday and it's my first shift. I get to work and my boss tells me to come with her. She opens up this door to what I called the dungeon room. It was actually the security camera room. At this point, I was like, surveillance room. What the duck did I steal? I don't think I did. She tells me that I swore during the training and that she was letting me go. So at this point, I know it was the stupid supervisor who did it. So I went full scream mode in this room and walked away without a job. Parents were pissed off, but didn't kick me out of the house. Fast forward 3 years after working at Subway for a year. I'm now a marketing consultant at Home Depot, which is located next to the Metro I applied. I make probably triple what the boss makes at Metro. I drive past the place about 40 times a day, and I see them having a smoke all the time. One day, I'm gonna roll down my window and just laugh. Tal got fired on my first day because the supervisor swore and the customer heard. Story 7. I hired a desktop support guy through an agency thinking I would try him out for a few weeks and offer him a full-time job if it works out. He's there to deal with user issues, so his hours are supposed to be 9 to 5 when the office is full. Monday, his first day, he doesn't show up until 4:30 in the afternoon. He has an elaborate story about driving back from a weekend in the country with his girlfriend, car breaking down, etc., etc. I naively assume one horrible commute could happen to anyone and laugh it off with him, thinking what an awkward way that would be to start a new job. Tuesday, he doesn't show up until after lunchtime. Again, there's some elaborate story. At this point, I'm starting to catch on that all is not right with this employee. Wednesday, I get a call from his agency around 11:30 in the morning saying that he is on his way into work, but that he is currently on board a train in a non-adjacent state. I tell the recruiter to call him back and tell him to not bother coming in today or ever. At the end of the pay period, I get a bill from the agency asking for 8 hours on Monday and Tuesday. It turns out he had stayed until late at night to bill us for a full day. Remember, his job is to be there to deal with desktop issues, not play video games and hang out with the janitors all night. As in all cases where I have had to fire someone, I'm at least partially responsible for creating the situation in which the employee failed. In this case, I should have vetted him more closely with his references and absolutely not left him in the building unsupervised. He could have robbed us blind, and I'm lucky he was just monumentally lazy, not criminal. Story 8. Not me, but I was working at the time. I had worked at a Panera when I was in college as a shift supervisor. We were looking for a new prep guy, and my manager interviewed this guy named Hennessy. No joke. I told my manager I didn't like him and not to hire him, but he did anyway. His first day he shows up and we give him some training on what to do, and he gets to work. After about 4 hours, my manager asks if he can take a minute out to go grab a new box of chips. Out of nowhere, the guy snaps and says, "Karen, you don't know me. I'm from the hood." My manager, without skipping a beat, says, "Yeah, and I'm from management leave." Fired him on the spot. Story 9. Oh, I got one. Girl interviewed horribly but was friends with the assistant store manager, so they pushed it through. Red flag 1. Girl was living at the transition center for people who just got out of juvie because she had turned 18. Red flag 2. She was nervous about posting background information and had asked what constituted a felony. Red flag 3. She get through starts that sat night. Well, she came into work as I was packing up to leave, but I had to come back and do the cash office for the manager. She looked higher than a kite, but most of the place smoked anyways. I come back that night, and the place is ducking buzzing. People look excited but nervous all at the same time. I get to the office, and the store manager, who was not working that night, was having a sit-down with the assistant manager, chewing him up and down. Ops manager sitting in on it. Holy crap, what went down? Turns out about 3/4 of the way through her shift, he BF shows up at the new job, takes her to the break room, kind of locks the door, or so they thought, and starts beat of the new girl on the break room table. Another new employee walks in on it happening and tells the manager ASAP. She is fired on the spot, starts all kind of commotion. The police were called in. She had a history with the police, but wasn't arrested. This began an investigation about where and how we were hiring new employees and led to the firing of that assistant manager, when several of his recommendations turned out to be on probation or recent felony parolees. One other piece of justice was that assistant manager was given a bottle of cleaner and made to clean that tabletop a number of times. I laugh at story 10. My brother used to work at a major national retailer as a display manager and told me this gem. Some of his duties included helping the LP people set up new cameras, run cable, stuff like that as well. So he was good friends with all the LP people. One day the LP guy called him into the surveillance room to check out a guy they were watching. It was a new guy on his first day, OTJ. Eng was working in the department where people would return stuff to get sent out for repair. They were located in the back of the store and had their own entrance/exit door. As soon as the NG was alone, he started grabbing merchandise and ran it out to his truck and stashed it there. He even moved his truck closer to the door to make it easier. He did all of this in full view of the security cameras in plain sight pointed at the door. He did this all day and completely filled his truck up with stuff. He had a topper over the bed and was even rearranging things to make it all fit. Of course, the LP people were getting a kick out of how dumb this guy was. And when he clocked out, they were waiting for him. They grabbed him and were asking him if he noticed the cameras all over, and he said he thought they were fake, even though they had cable attachments, powered LEDs, and could move. Needless to say, he wasn't too swift. They asked him, "Don't you know where you were working?" in reference to his department. He said no. They all laughed when they told him that all the stuff he stole was broken. It never occurred to the idiot that that was why it was being returned, even though it was blatantly obvious. He ended up having over $5,000 worth of tools and other items in his truck and was hit with several felony charges. Story 11. I'm a senior DBA and I've worked alone in my position for 5 years. I'm planning to move, so we hire a guy to replace me. He has qualifications out the ass and master certifications that make me look like a dunce on paper. So he comes in on his first day and I ask him to change directories and kick off a script. He looks at me like I'm crazy and asks what the command to change directories is. It's CD mother ducker. How do you not know this? He claims he only works with a guy and has 0 command line experience, even though it was listed on his resume. I then give him a printed out shell script and tell him to copy, paste, line for line what is on the script so that he understands the process. He comes back 5 minutes later and says that he can't figure it out. The next day we had to fire him. Story 12. Worked at McDonald's for a few months when one day I'm on front counter. Another girl is scheduled to clean up around the lobby and indoor play place. So about an hour into her 3-hour shift, a costumer comes up to me and says a child peed in the play structure. So of course I tell my manager and she tells me to go clean it up. No big deal, as I am in the fast food industry. So anyway, as I'm gonna get gloves and paper towels and cleaning supplies, our store manager, my boss's boss, asked me what I was doing away from the front counter. I relay the info to her and she tells me to have, we will just call her Kay, but I don't even remember the girl's name, Kay, go clean it up since she is assigned to the lobby. I go and tell Kay that she has to go clean up the mess. Bitabu, we are in the back of the store, so only other employees are hearing the convo. She says no, and I tell her that the store manager wants her to do it, that I am not trying to pawn it off on her. She says no again, so I say, well, you go tell her that because I'm not getting in trouble for you. So she goes and tells the store manager that she is not cleaning up the mess and that she doesn't have to by law if she refuses to. Long story short, my store manager sent her home and I had to clean up the mess. I never saw the girl or her name on the schedule again. While the doctor girl got fired for refusing to clean up pee, I ended up cleaning it up. Story 13. Not first day, but close. I have two of these. I'm a mid-level .NET developer, and last year I started this 6-month contract-to-hire gig for a medical transcription company. First week goes by slowly, me trying to get them to give me as much work as I can, as they get me set up while I'm there. First week passes, and I get a call saying, we don't need you anymore. They had a ton of work/projects to do. I think it ended up being a budget issue, but Second one, I started working for another 6-month contract-to-hire gig at a very well-known medical insurance company, and day one, things were bad. I didn't even have a login, so I'm stuck there reading some printed off specs for some of the systems. Eventually I get access, start getting programs installed, request for things to be installed. It's like pulling teeth. Then they realize they gave me a standard machine image instead of the developer image. So we basically start from scratch again, programs installed, etc. I pass the time by being proactive, getting their Java tools installed. This company had both .NET and Java apps and wanted me to learn Java, and even went so far as throwing up some mock-ups for projects in .NET, converting to JavaScript, implementing into the Java project, all while waiting for programs/access I needed. 2.5 weeks later, I get a call from my contracting company saying I'm being let go for not having enough initiative. And by that last day I worked, they still had yet to get me access to the .NET code repository I needed to do my job in the first place. Story 14. Took about 2 weeks, but I got fired for the exact same reason I got hired. I had just graduated high school and took a job at a Little Caesars. In the interview, I explained that I would be moving away at the end of the summer for college, to which my manager said was fine since they really only needed someone to work that summer. After a couple of days, a manager at a Little Caesars, a few towns over, was killed in a car wreck. So our manager went to cover that store until someone could be brought in. Meanwhile, I started working with the assistant manager, who I had not yet met or worked with. Through general conversation, it eventually came up that I was leaving at the end of the summer. She seemed indifferent about it, and that was that. The day that our manager is starting back at our store, I walk past her and say hi, and she acts like nothing is wrong. She lets me get clocked in and get my stupid little apron on and everything. When I walk to my station, she comes up to me and was like, hey, I hear you're leaving at the end of the summer. I said, well, yeah, we talked about that in the interview. She just said, yeah, we really need someone that's actually going to be here for a while. I'm not technically firing you, but you're pretty much not going to get any hours. To shorten this story, I'll simply say that I showed her my middle finger, crammed my apron in the oven, which didn't go over well, and walked out. Came back a week later to pick my check up, received several dirty looks to go with it, and walked back out. Story 15. Not me and not on the first day, but my friend was fired on the second day. She worked at a sushi restaurant as a hostess, and on the first day, she decided to be proactive and water the plants in the restaurant. She found out later that day the flowers were fake and were leaking all over the walls and banisters. The owner was pissed, but thought it was cute, so he kept her. On the second day, she was assigned to be the cashier and forgot to charge tax on every lunch and dinner transaction that night. She was promptly fired and told never to come back. Story 16. My husband just had this happen at his company. Apparently, the guy lied about his education, and the background check didn't come back until he had already started the job. He was shown the door first day. It was a big job, too. Director level, I think. I had one guy I fired. Not first day, but probably 3 days in. We still fondly refer to him as push-up guy. I hired a lot of kids right out of school for temp jobs. Many of them really didn't have a clue how to get along in a corporate office. So I spent a lot of time coaching about making eye contact, speaking up, using office equipment, etc. However, there were some people where I just threw in the towel, and push-up guy was one of them. He was an extremely tall, gangly kid. He struggled with all of the basics and really couldn't focus. He continuously fidgeted during training and just seemed really checked out. One day I came out of my office and I see a pair of feet sticking out the opening of his cube. Turn the corner and he's on the floor doing push-ups. When I told him that it really wasn't appropriate to do push-ups in the office, particularly with your feet sticking out in the corridor, he replied, "I'm sorry, but the work is so boring I can't stay awake any other way." Hopefully, he found a more physically oriented job. Story 17. I work as a programmer for a company where my dad handles hiring and firing for the IT/programming department. About a year ago, my dad hired a kid for data entry that wasn't qualified, but seemed to have a great attitude and potential. Plus, my dad wanted to help him out because he had a rough home life. The kid called in one day and told my dad that he would need time off because his father was in the hospital. My dad tried to call him a few days later to make sure he was all right, and it turns out that the kid was in jail and his father was never ill. He made up the story to try to keep his job, hoping it would be there when he got out of jail. Needless to say, he was fired immediately. Story 18. My old roommate was hired to be a chef at a country club. He went through 5 interviews. He had to prove to them he could cook. He was told that some of the members could ask for almost anything they wanted, so he had to cook several meals they just made up off the top of their heads. He talked about how strange that was, but thought it would be fun. They loved everything he cooked and told him he got the job. They told him to be there on Monday, and their head chef would show him the ropes. He shows up Monday, and one of the people that interviewed him looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You don't work here. Why are you in the kitchen?" Then another man shows up and asks him to leave. Story 19. I didn't get fired, but I had went on a job interview, which was being done by a staffing company, but it was actually at the business. I spent like 4 hours there. And then at the end, the lady told me to come in Monday at 8 a.m. to start training. So I show up, and there is a group of people there. They take us all into a room for orientation, and we put our names on a sheet. After a few minutes, a lady comes and asks me to step into the hall. She said that they do not have me as being hired and that I wouldn't be starting today. I didn't have a car at the time, and my grandfather took me to work, which was 35 minutes from home. He had just gotten home when I told him he had to come get me. I was pissed, so I went across the street to a gas station, got a drink, and sat on the curb. It was July, and I was wearing a shirt and tie to add to my humiliation. It sucked because I had turned down other offers for that job. Story 20. Neither hired nor the one fired, but I witnessed a guy get fired on the first day, and it was because during orientation, we were all told we may be asked to work on weekend. And this guy basically said, "Duck that," to our boss. He didn't even last the day. A few days later, another one of us new employees got fired because he failed a substances test we all took the day before and had been warned about on the first day. When asked how he could have failed since we all knew it was coming, he said, "I got so nervous about the substances test I had to smoke some pot to calm myself down."